I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about Hak the Shmuz. Now, Hak the Shmuz is a concept that I believe is very, very important for taking the shmuz to the next level. Typically, when a person listens to the shmuz, they'll hear something, maybe it'll be motivational, maybe it'll be inspirational, but there's a very particular focus of the shmuz, and I think the process of Hak the Shmuz is very integral for allowing a person to A, take the shmuz to the next level, B, get a much better understanding. Now typically, when we do this live at the shmuz, we'll sit around the table and we'll actually do this in an interactive manner. When we do this, obviously recorded, we don't have that luxury, so during the video portion of it, what will happen is I'll say over the steps of the Hak the Shmuz, but again, I think it'll be very, very beneficial to get a better understanding of what it is that we're actually doing. So let me begin with the basic concept behind the Hak the Shmuz, and then we'll sort of work it through. The basic focus is to gain a greater clarity of what the shmuz is doing. Now, typically, the shmuz begins with a question. There'll be a chazal. The chazal will be either a story in the Gemara, it'll be a particular Rishon's take on what had happened in the Chumash, it'll be a particular little piece of a chazal. Now, the next part after getting what the chazal is saying is the question on the chazal. And this is really where the action starts. You see, there's a reason why we ask a question on the chazal. When we hear a chazal and it says X, Y, and Z, when the shmuz begins with a question, we'll ask that question because we start with a particular perspective. Now, the we being the general starting position of any thinking person who'll read the Chumash, who'll read the Gemara, will start with a particular perspective of the world. So, for instance, we'll read a Gemara, and a question will come to us. The reason why that question comes to us is because we have a view of the world or a view of that issue from a starting perspective. However, Chazal clearly had a different perspective, hence the question. So invariably the question is because I start from this perspective and clearly Chazal have a different view of the world. Now, if that's the question, the focal point of the shmuz is to gain Chazal's perspective on life, on that midah, on whatever that issue is. And that's where all the movement in the shmuz really begins. It'll start with the chazal. The question starts from a perspective that causes the question. The movement will bring us along the stage, and then the answer finally will in fact be the answer to the question. So invariably, once we start with the question, what will happen in the shmuz next is there'll be various steps of movement. Now, typically, each of those steps is a building block towards a different perspective. So there'll be step 1, step 2, step 3. After a number of steps, then in fact, you and I will now have a different perspective than we started. So if we started with perspective A, with these various steps we have a different perspective, then comes the answer. The answer to the question we asked is, now that we have a different vantage point, now that we have a different perspective, we can look at that chazal through the eyes of chazal. We can view the issues of life as the chachamim did. Now we no longer have the question, and typically that's the structure of the shmuz. A question, which is based on our perspective, and then the steps of the answer, which changes our viewpoint, changes our perspective or the way we feel about something. Then the answer, based on this new perspective, we understand the answer to the chazal, and that sort of ratifies, or that sort of strengthens our new understanding and shows us that that's the way Chazal viewed it. Now, these steps, the mukhrach process, the question, the steps, and the answer, is really the essence of what the shmuz is. There's one last step in the process, and that's oftentimes the application. The application will be when we have a particular new concept, a new way of viewing things that's, again, been processed or has come out from the steps of the shmuz. Now we'll apply it to the world. So for now we look at a particular character trait or a particular issue in a different way, now applying that to our lives, applying it to the world, using that as a tool to help change our lives. Now, as you'll see on the site, there'll be a shmuz, a Hak the Shmuz form. I'm going to hold it up for a minute over here, but I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but it's a PDF form. It's on the website. You can download it, and what it does is it sort of helps you to formulate in your own mind exactly the structure. Now, I recommend using this when you're listening to a chazal, when you're listening, let's say, to a shmuz, using this form actually for a few times, because what it'll do, it'll train your mind in terms of how to listen to a shmuz in a better way. What I will do in the next number of shmuzim will actually record some of the Hak the Shmuz, and hopefully that will allow you to get a better sense of how the system actually works.